The living embodiment of perseverance is Poland. Few nations have survived the number of calamities that have befallen the descendants of the Polani tribe. Any number of events, ranging from the Mongol invasion to World War II, could have been the end of Poland, but the stalwart people of the fields have survived and rebuilt themselves time after time, re-emerging stronger and more determined to defend their place in the world. This is the story of Poland. Poland is found at the crossroads of Europe, where they proudly hold the middle ground of the European plain. Their modern borders stretch from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Carpathian Mountains in the south. The Oder River creates a natural border between Germany in the west, and the eastern border is largely defined by the Bug River, separating Poland from Ukraine and Belarus. The earliest semi-permanent human settlements in this region can be traced back to around 6000 BC. 8,000-year-old pottery fragments unearthed near Jadwiga have been found to contain fatty acids consistent with cheese production, meaning the Polish are the oldest documented cheesemakers in all of Europe. Bronze and Iron Ages came and went, and with them the temperate Polish region attracted a wide variety of different cultures and ethnic groups. The Lusatians built walled settlements called gords along the Warta River basin. These forts protected the Lusatian people from various Baltic, Germanic, and Scythian tribes, and were the first permanent settlements in Poland. By the age of antiquity, Poland was a melting pot of too many cultures to count. German, Celtic, Roman, and Slavic tribes all fought for control of this crossroads at the center of Europe. From these groups emerged a conglomerated tribe consisting mostly of a Slavic, German, and Baltic background. This tribe was known as the Polani, or the Polans. The Polani tribe migrated and settled in what is now known as the Greater Poland region, or Polska, along the Warta River during the 6th century. There is an old myth amongst the Slavic people of Eastern Europe called the legend of Lech, Czech, and Rus that goes, over 1,000 years ago, there were 3 Slav brothers wandering with their tribes through the lands of forests and fields stretching between 2 large rivers, Oder in the west and Dnieper in the east, in search of the best place to settle. One day, after months of weary travel, a beautiful sight appeared before their eyes. On a hill, there stood a huge oak tree with a nest between its branches. From the nest, a mighty white eagle soared into the sky. Lech was amazed by the view and considered it as a sign from the gods for him and his people. He decided to settle there and chose the white eagle with its wings spread wide against the sunset sky for their emblem. Soon they built a town which they called Gniezno, a nest in the Slavic language. The town became the capital of their nation and the first capital of Poland, and so the 3 brothers separated. Czech decided to go south, and Rus chose the east, where they started their own countries. Gniezno was founded around the 8th century by the Polani tribe, effectively becoming the first Polish capital. This capital was a stronghold for pagan culture and a regional trade hub. It became central to Poland's formation as a country. The 10th century brought forth the Piast Dynasty. Under their control, Poland began its transformation from a loosely organized tribe into a strong, unified duchy, capable of protecting its people and territory. In the year 966, Duke Mieszko I figuratively baptized Poland, converting the primarily pagan people to Roman Catholicism. The bishopric of Poznan was founded in 968, and a document titled the Dogme Iudex established the Polish region under the Piast monarchy as an entity under the protection of the Catholic Church. This document also defined the first official borders of Poland, with Gniezno as its capital and flagship city. In 997, Prussian pagans, angered by the baptism of Poland, martyred the Bishop of Prague, who was later canonized Adalbert, patron saint of Poland. The son of Duke Mieszko, Boleslaw the Brave, returned Saint Adalbert's remains to Poland in exchange for the body's weight in gold. Boleslaw sought further favor with the church by obtaining the right of investiture from the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III. This allowed for the creation of additional bishoprics in Gniezno, as well as an archdiocese, which significantly raised Poland's status in the eyes of Catholic Europe. Rewarding Poland's newfound holy status, Emperor Otto gifted Boleslaw ornate royal regalia and a replica of the Holy Lance. After receiving the blessing of Pope John XIX, these royal gifts were used to crown Boleslaw as the first king of Poland in the year 1025, and every king that followed until 1794. Boleslaw the Brave is also remembered for expanding the borders of Poland in every direction, conquering parts of Germany, Hungary, Moravia, and the Kievan Rus. Boleslaw died the same year he was coronated, at age 58. The century following his death was chaotic. Poland's conversion to Catholicism was not initially popular amongst the majority pagan population. Tensions reached a boiling point during the pagan reaction of the 1030s. Large portions of the newly founded kingdom erupted in rebellion. Monasteries were burned to the ground, and priests were killed in the streets. It is believed that the nobles, upset with the monarchy's increasing amount of power, antagonized the peasants into revolt, though this partly backfired because the peasant population had grievances with the nobility as well, because of growing feudal restraints and pressures. In 1031, King Mieszko II was forcibly stripped of his crown and forced to flee the throne. His son, Duke Casimir the Restorer, was eventually able to reunite most of Poland, in the process moving the country's capital to Krakow. However, he was unable to reclaim the mantle and title of king. The crown of Poland would not go unworn for long, as Casimir the Restorer's son, Bolesław II, was able to reclaim the crown upon receiving support from Pope Gregory VII in 1076. Around 50 years later, in 1138, the Kingdom of Poland would split once again after Bolesław III, also known as the Wry Mouth, divided the land he ruled between his 5 sons. The once singular kingdom was now the 5 duchies of Greater Poland, Lesser Poland, Mazovia, Sandomierz, and Silesia. In the early 1200s, the Dukes of Silesia, Henry the Bearded, and his son, Henry the Pious, would attempt to reunite these duchies, but the invading Mongols would prevent them from realizing their dream. The Mongols devastated Poland, killing much of the population and forcing most of the rest to flee to new lands. In the years that followed, waves of German and Flemish immigrants would settle in the largely vacant Polish lands. Additionally, in 1264, the Statute of Kalisz allowed the Polish Jewish population a level of autonomy unheard of at the time, attracting immigrants from all across Europe. In 1296, Przemysl II reclaimed the crown of Poland, unifying the kingdom after decades of division. And in 1320, Władysław the Short was the first king of Poland to be crowned at the Wawel Cathedral in Krakow. The year 1333 brought with it the reign of Casimir III, the Great. Casimir heralded in Poland's golden age, building numerous castles, expanding and strengthening Poland's military, and reforming the judicial system. The Great King turned Poland into a European powerhouse, conquering Ruthenia, creating the University of Krakow, and even imposing quarantines that slowed the spread of the Black Death, which was decimating most of Europe. When he died in 1370, after ruling for 37 years, the historic Piast dynasty failed, and without a direct heir, the crown of Poland passed to Louis of Anjou, who would preside over a personal union controlling Poland, Hungary, and Croatia. His daughter, Jadwiga, would forever be remembered as Poland's first woman king. You heard me right. She was king. Jadwiga was born in Hungary and grew up in the capital city of Buda. Her mother, Queen Elizabeth, was a woman with great vision, an expert politician, and a strong negotiator. After the death of her husband, Louis of Anjou, her first daughter, Mary, ascended to the throne of Hungary, not as queen, but as king. King Mary was monarch of Poland as well, in name, but in actuality, the country was strained from their Hungarian rulers. The Polish wanted a king who ruled from Krakow, and they eventually received one in Jadwiga. King Jadwiga was crowned in the Wawel Cathedral on October 16, 1384. Also, Jadwiga was already betrothed to William of Austria, but advisors from Poland convinced her to open up negotiations with Jagiełła, the Grand Duke of Lithuania, which at this point in history was a mighty entity of its own. Jagiełła and his Grand Duchy of Lithuania were still pagan, but upon learning of the opportunity to marry Jadwiga, he signed the Union of Krewo, a sort of prenuptial promise to convert to Christianity. Jagiełła took on the Catholic name of Władysław, which I will now refer to him as, and married Jadwiga on the 15th of February, 1386. There is a legend that says Jadwiga only agreed to the marriage after a period of lengthy prayer and a message of divine inspiration. Władysław was crowned the following month as co-king. The union between Jadwiga and Władysław marked the beginning of the Jagiellonian dynasty. The Polish-Lithuanian Union would become one of the most powerful cooperations in Europe's history, incorporating the huge swath of Lithuanian territories under the Polish monarchy allowed Jadwiga and Władysław the resources, manpower, and sphere of influence to create an empire in every aspect except for in name. Jadwiga spent her remaining years cementing the stability of her realm through expert levels of diplomacy and mediation. Her prowess was due in large part to her mother's teachings. Jadwiga was said to have been the best of the best. Her story would be cut short in 1399 at the young age of 25 due to postpartum complications. The daughter she gave birth to passed away a few days before she did, and as Jadwiga's only heir, the hereditary monarchy of Poland passed with her. Poland would come to adopt a policy of an elective monarchy, where kings elected by the nobles would replace dynasties. Jadwiga was canonized into sainthood in 1997 by Pope John Paul II. The increased and united power of the Poland-Lithuanian alliance allowed for King Vladislav to finally defeat the longtime thorn in the side of Poland, the Teutonic Order of Knights. The Battle of Grunwald in 1410 was one of the largest and most consequential battles in the history of Poland. The forces of Poland and Lithuania won a decisive victory over the Knights of Teutonia, inflicting massive casualties and permanently weakening the order. Poland wasn't able to fully capitulate the Teutons or conquer their territory in entirety, but the damage to their reputation and coffers was so steep that the Teutonic Order would never recover. Not to mention, there wasn't much need for a crusading force in Northern Europe any longer. King Vladislav died from a cold in 1434 at the ripe old age of either 74 or 84. The decade of his birth is disputed. He had ruled Poland and Lithuania for 48 years, making him the longest ruling monarch in Polish history. His legacy is indisputably massive, and his place in history is worthy of its own video. Anyways, upon his death, the crown of Poland was left to his eldest son, Vladislav III, and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was left to his younger son, Casimir IV. The official union between the two countries was over, and due to the young ages of both Casimir and Vladislav III, the local nobles of both Lithuania and Poland used their authority to promote divides between the two brothers and their two respective countries. For a short time, it seemed as if the former union would be at odds. Poland initially tried to reassert its dominance over Lithuania, threatening military intervention. But the threats were largely empty, as Vladislav, who had also inherited the Hungarian throne, was concerned with Hungarian matters, and most importantly, the Ottoman threat to the south. After the Seventh Hungarian-Ottoman conflict, fought between the years 1437 and 1442, resulted in a Hungarian victory, King Vladislav III was pressured by the Vatican to launch a crusade against Sultan Murad II. The unsuccessful Crusade of Varna followed suit. During the decisive battle at Varna, King Vladislav of Hungary, Croatia, and Poland was killed during a cavalry charge. His death left a power vacuum with no clear successor. After a 3-year kingless hiatus, the elective institution of the Polish monarchy proclaimed the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Casimir IV, to be the rightful Polish monarch in 1447. King Casimir would also retain his leadership of Lithuania as its Grand Duke, essentially reforming the union first instituted by his father and Jadwiga. On the Baltic coast, the nobles of Prussia were angry about the downfall of their power after the Battle of Grunwald. They formed the Prussian Confederation in direct opposition to the Knights of the Teutonic Order, believing them to be arbitrary lords who no longer served a purpose. In 1454, the Confederation began an open rebellion against the order and formally requested King Casimir to incorporate Prussia into the Polish kingdom. The Prussian Confederation swore absolute allegiance to Casimir, after which Poland formally declared war on the Order of the Teutonic Knights. The 13 Years' War followed. As evidenced by the extensive time frame, it was long and brutal. Eventually, the Polish-Prussian alliance won, resulting in the Peace of Thorn, the main consequence of which was that the Teutonic Order would become a tributary state to the Polish crown, along with the forced concession of East Pomerania. The Teutonic Order was already fragmented and weak. This loss would directly lead to their demise and subsequent rise of the Duchy of Prussia. King Casimir died in 1492, at the age of 64. Under his reign, Poland became stronger than ever. His diplomatic prowess allowed Poland to become a valued voice amongst the giants of Europe, and his focus on developing the resources of his vast realm turned a once relatively poor kingdom into a beacon of trade and economic development. The Jagiellonian dynasty flourished under his leadership. At their peak, they controlled the kingdoms of Poland, Bohemia, and Hungary, as well as the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Two additional interesting facts about Casimir are that he was honored with the Order of the Garter, the highest award for chivalry and honor in England. I guess I should be referring to him as Sir King Casimir. Less fun, but interesting nonetheless, is that in 1973, a team of 12 scientists opened up his tomb to study, after which 10 of them died. It was discovered that toxins emitted from the fungus in his coffin caused the deaths, though that might be a clever cover-up for an ancient Polish curse. Following Casimir's death, Polish nobles furthered the feudal practices that were becoming commonplace across Europe. Polish peasants were practically held hostage on the agricultural estates owned by the landed elite. These farmstead prisons were known as folwarks. At the detriment to the Polish people, feudalism in Poland was an efficient beast that increased the wealth, power, and control of the nobility and monarchy. In 1493, the son and heir of Casimir, King John Albert, agreed to the creation of the Sejm, a double-headed parliament consisting of a lower house called the Chamber of Deputies and an upper house called the Chamber of Senators. 13 years after the creation of the Sejm, in 1505, the General Assembly enacted the Nihil Novi, which directly translates to nothing new. The Nihil Novi can be thought of almost as a constitution. It transferred power from the monarchy into the hands of the collective nobility. Its translation in its entirety meant nothing new without common consent, or nothing about us without us. It forbade the king from passing laws without the approval of the nobility. Ironically, this act of democracy, or common consent, didn't extend to the common people, who were, of course, still working the fields. Despite the exclusion of the peasant majority, this event marked the beginning of the Polish Age of Golden Liberty. The rest of the 16th century was defined by the Protestant Reformation and the cementation of the Polish-Lithuanian Union. While the rest of Europe was struggling with the emergence of Luther and Protestantism, Poland took a unique approach dictated by tolerance. This tolerant approach towards differing religions allowed Poland to avoid the religious wars that plagued most of Europe's intolerant kingdoms. They didn't avoid conflict entirely, of course, but compared to their contemporaries, they saw little violence and turmoil. In 1569, after centuries of sharing a unique alliance and cultural bond, the Union of Lublin officially united Poland and Lithuania into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Commonwealth, as I will now refer to it as, was a single state under an elective monarchy, largely controlled by the Polish nobility. This newly founded state had all the makings of a great power. It held dominion over roughly 400,000 square miles, stretching from the Carpathian Mountains and Baltic Sea to the Russian plains. This period can be defined as a golden age for Poland, but not all saw the fruits of this venture. The common people were still trapped on the feudal folwarks, and a government-directed process of Polonization in previous Lithuanian territories discriminated and oppressed various ethnic and religious minorities. The rest of the 1500s were exciting times. Henry de Valois was the first elected king of the Commonwealth. He signed the Henrician Articles, which furthered the nobility's control over Poland and acted as a constitution for all further monarchs to follow. Shortly after, though, Henry inherited the French throne after the death of his brother, and he gave up his role as king of the Commonwealth, leaving for France. This opened up the position for King Stefan Báthory of Hungary. King Stefan brought the Commonwealth into the ongoing Livonian War, started by the Tsardom of Russia, over the territory known as Old Livonia. His leadership turned the tide of war and secured the Commonwealth new lands along the Baltic Sea. After Stefan came Sigismund Vasa III. He acquired the crown after defeating the Habsburg Archduke Maximilian III in the War of Polish Succession. Sigismund's ascension to the throne of the Commonwealth marked a new age in Poland, where he was the first of the House of Vasa to rule, and the second longest reigning monarch, ruling for a period of 45 years. 4 years after his ascension, in 1592, Sigismund inherited the throne of Sweden, which he ruled under a personal union with the Commonwealth for a brief 7 years, before his uncle, Duke Charles of Södermanland, and the Swedish nobility deposed him in 1599. Who knows how history would have played out if the Commonwealth-Sweden union would have lasted? Sigismund would remain bitter about the loss of his father's kingdom for the rest of his life. His anger would pass down to his son and cause many conflicts between the two nations. A decade later, in 1609, Sigismund took advantage of the Russian Tsardom's time of troubles following the failure of the line of Rurik. The ensuing Russian Civil War was the perfect opportunity for Sigismund to unleash the famed and feared winged hussars, who trampled across the Russian plains unhindered before ending their campaign with the occupation of Moscow. Sigismund's victory allowed the Commonwealth to seize the city of Smolensk and some of the surrounding region. This marked the greatest territorial extent of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Around the same time, in 1621, a force of winged hussars, led by Jan Karl Chodkiewicz, repelled an invading Ottoman force attempting to seize parts of Moldavia. His victory was the nail in the coffin for Sultan Osman II's reign over the Ottoman Empire. Sigismund's reign as the Polish monarch ended in 1632. His old age was hastened by the death of his wife, a battle with gout, and a stroke. He is remembered as a complex ruler. His territorial expansions were successful, but his religious intolerance was distasteful to a populace used to tolerance and integration. His strong-armed policies and undermining of the same left the Commonwealth in a tricky place following his death. I almost forgot to mention that Sigismund relocated the Polish capital from Krakow to Warsaw in 1596 because of its centralized location. The tangled ball of yarn that was the Commonwealth fell to Sigismund's son, Vladislav IV, who largely failed to untangle the mess left by his father. Vladislav did succeed in protecting the Commonwealth's borders and newly found territorial acquisitions, but after his death in 1648, the Commonwealth would begin its decline due to internal conflicts and a series of wars that left the country's strength diminished and fatigued. The first of these conflicts was the Khmelnytsky Uprising in Commonwealth-controlled Ukraine. Some historians refer to it as the Cossack-Polish War. The primary cause of this conflict was the oppressive anti-Orthodox policies implemented over the course of the last couple monarchs. The primarily Orthodox Ukrainian and Ruthenian population fiercely rejected the Commonwealth's attempts of Polonization. This was especially true for the Cossacks, the semi-nomadic people of the steppe region around the Azov Sea. Khmelnytsky was a Cossack who fought for the Commonwealth against the Ottomans. Upon returning home to Ukraine following his military service, he discovered that his family and his people were treated as second-class citizens. After being forced from his home due to various disputes and finding no help from Polish officials, he gathered a force of Cossack foot soldiers and started an open rebellion against the Commonwealth. In order to combat the Polish cavalry with their winged hussars, he enlisted the help of the Crimean Tatars and their esteemed horsemen. After 9 years of fighting, the rebel alliance was successful in forcing the Commonwealth to relinquish their control over most of eastern Ukraine. The Cossack Hetmanate, also known as the Zaporozhian Host, was established as an independent state. The years between 1654 and 1667 are known as the Deluge, which literally means the flood. But in Poland's case, it's referencing the onslaught of Sweden and Russia. The Cossack uprising brought the rivalry between the Tsars of Russia and the Commonwealth into the headlights of Tsar Alexis, who believed that the Commonwealth controlled territory that was rightfully his. The Tsar's army invaded during the summer of 1654 and quickly occupied huge swaths of land across the Eastern Commonwealth, including the major city of Smolensk. As Russia occupied the east, Sweden invaded from the west. Greater Poland, the Commonwealth's richest province, was ransacked by the Swedish forces, who at this point in history were pound for pound the strongest military force in Europe. After decades of near constant warfare, the Commonwealth's forces were depleted, tired, and low on resources. To their credit, they stood their ground and fought battle after battle in a desperate attempt to save Greater Poland. But in the end, they were overrun by Sweden. The Deluge is a period of history chock full of important battles, acts of valor, and devastating losses. To keep this video moving along, here's a brief summary. Despite initial Swedish success, as the war progressed, their advance halted, primarily due to Russia and Prussia declaring war on them. In the end, they were able to gain control of Livonia, force the Vasa King Casimir to renounce his claim on the throne of Sweden, and retain all the wealth and goods they looted from the Greater Poland region. Russia gained control over much of Ukraine, including the Cossack Hetmanate. In addition, Prussia emerged as an independent duchy, free of the Commonwealth's control. And as for the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, utter destruction. The Commonwealth was no longer seen as a European great power. Its ability to project force militarily, economically, and even culturally had been decimated. According to the professor Andrzej Rottermund of Warsaw, the deluge was more destructive to Poland than World War II. Almost every major city was reduced to rubble and ash. Only Lwów and Gdańsk avoided major destruction. What wasn't burnt was stolen by the invading armies. Almost none of these stolen items were ever returned to Poland. Entire libraries and state records were carted away, along with anything else of value found in the palaces, castles, or city centers. The Commonwealth's greatest loss of all was the innumerable loss of life. The population losses between the years 1648 through 1660 are estimated between 30 to 50%. Millions of innocents were killed across the country. In the extreme case of Warsaw, it is estimated that 90% of the population was displaced or killed, reducing the city's population from 20,000 pre-war inhabitants to just 2,000. It's impossible to know for sure just how much Poland suffered during the deluge, but its effects would ripple across the next 100 years, directly leading to Poland's complete partitioning and dissolution as a state. On a brighter note, in 1683, Poland's winged hussars engaged in the greatest cavalry charge in Europe's history at the Battle of Vienna. 18,000 horsemen, 3,000 of which were winged hussars, led by their king, John Sobieski III, the Lion of Lechistan, charged headfirst into an Ottoman army estimated to be 100 to 200,000 soldiers strong. This act of valor struck a mighty blow to the exhausted Ottoman forces and turned the tide of battle in favor of the Holy League alliance. Eventually, the Ottomans were routed, and Vienna was successfully defended. This siege was the farthest the Ottomans would ever make it into Europe. The 18th century began with, you guessed it, more war. The Great Northern War started in 1700, when a coalition force consisting of Russia, Denmark, and Saxony invaded Swedish holdings across the Baltic Sea. Poland found itself caught in the crossfire. Sweden won a few decisive battles against Poland, which resulted in the forced disposition of Poland's king, Augustus II. After which, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was then ruled by the Swedish-backed Stanislaw Leszczynski as a de facto puppet state for 5 years before the Swedish monarch, Charles XII, was driven into exile, allowing Augustus II to reclaim the Polish throne. After Augustus's death in 1733, the War of Polish Succession began. The Bourbon monarchs in France and Spain saw backing Stanislaus I as an opportunity to test the mettle of Austria, who were supporting the claim of Augustus III, who also had the support of Russia, Saxony, and Prussia. Roughly 100,000 soldiers died before Augustus III was confirmed as the rightful king of the Commonwealth. This war cemented the once great Commonwealth as a giant past its prime. Its institution of an elective monarchy had once again been used as a political and literal battleground for foreign powers. Only one more king would rule Poland following Augustus III. In 1764, Stanislaw II was elected king by the Sejm. Stanislaw had the direct support of Russia through his personal relationship with the Empress, Catherine the Great. The two monarchs were said to have been lovers during Stanislaw's extensive time in the Russian court as a diplomat. Although it appeared that Stanislaw would be a Russian puppet, he took it upon himself to fix the ailing Commonwealth through a series of reforms focused on internal stability and maintaining peace with neighboring powers. These reforms failed, in large part due to opposition from conservative nobles who preferred to preserve their own wealth and influence. The incongruous nature between the monarchy and nobility was obvious amongst the foreign great powers surrounding Poland. They took it as an opportunity to finally put the nail in the coffin of the once mighty Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The first partitioning occurred in 1772. By 1795, Poland would cease to exist independently. The leaders of Prussia, Russia, and Austria all had territorial interests across Poland. On February 19th, after gathering in Vienna, they drew up a plan to seize what they wanted, and by early August, troops from each nation were marching into the Commonwealth, practically unhindered. Regiments of the Bar Confederation, a group of Polish nobles founded in 1768, dedicated to combating Russian influence inside Poland, put up a good fight against the invaders, but their sacrifice was fought in vain. Their opponents were just too numerous. Prussia annexed most of the land Poland seized from the Teutonic Order nearly 300 years ago, allowing them to finally link their disconnected territories. Additionally, they seized parts of Greater Poland and Kuyavia. They were probably looking for that 8,000-year-old cheese mentioned earlier. In total, Prussia seized close to 14,000 square miles of land, along with about 500,000 people. Frederick the Great, king in Prussia, was now able to call himself King of Prussia. He moved 26,000 German colonists into the newly seized regions and pushed policies of Germanization in an effort to cement control of the region. Although Prussia seized the smallest amount of land compared to Russia and Austria, they took the best that Poland had. Austria seized a big chunk of the Little Poland region, including the county of Krakow, and the entirety of Galicia. In total, they received roughly 32,000 square miles of territory and a whopping 2.7 million Polish people. The Russians annexed most of the land east of the boundary created by the Dwina, Drut, and Dnieper rivers. This amounted to roughly 36,000 square miles and 1.3 million people. In total, the first partition cost the Commonwealth approximately one-third of its territory and one-third of its population. Almost 20 years after the first partition in 1791, the Sejm ratified the May 3rd Constitution. It was the first modern constitution in Europe, and second in the world following only the United States. It outlined a system separating powers between three branches of government and a set of checks and balances between them. Sound familiar? The most admirable aspect of the Constitution was the enacted notion of equality between nobles and the common people, emphasizing that the people were under the direct protection of the government. This furthered the slow abolition of feudal serfdom, which still plagued Europe. The adoption of the May 3rd Constitution was not popular amongst the old nobility of the Commonwealth, who had the most to lose. They formed the Targowica Confederation in retaliation, an anti-constitution coalition. Poland's absolute monarchical neighbors were also threatened by the constitution. They feared it would influence dissenting factions in their own countries to aggressively push similar ideals. The Targowica Confederation betrayed their own countrymen and sought an audience with the Russian Empress Catherine the Great. Those grotesque old nobles invited Russia to invade the Commonwealth again, only 2 decades after the last invasion. Prussia at this point was a declared ally of the Commonwealth, but when duty called, they declined to honor their agreement, leaving Poland to defend against Russia alone, citing the Constitution's adoption as a reason to abandon their ally. In reality, a strengthened Commonwealth under a new constitution threatened their ambitions. The Polish-Russian War of 1792, also known as the War in the Defense of the Constitution, ensued, but only lasted a mere 2 months. Despite being outnumbered by the Russian army, the Commonwealth was putting up a strong fight. The few battles that were fought ended largely in stalemate, so it looked like the Polish forces had a good chance of staving off the Russian invasion and successfully defending their constitution. That's why it came as a surprise to many when King Stanislaw sought a ceasefire and diplomatic end to the war. The Polish military was widely upset at the king's decision, especially the head of the armed forces, Prince Poniatowski and Andrzej Kościuszko, the American Revolutionary War hero and Lieutenant General of the Commonwealth, who hadn't lost a battle against the Russians yet. Both openly condemned the ceasefire and resigned from their posts in contempt. This was after they had already considered open rebellion. At one point, the prince even ordered the king to be brought to his military's encampment, by force if necessary. The bottom line is that the Polish army wanted to fight and defend their homeland. They were strong-willed and well-supplied. The king simply gave in to fear, believing his country's cause was hopeless against the larger Russian forces. It's hard to blame King Stanislaw for doing what he thought was best for his people. He believed a diplomatic solution could bring an end to the war, potentially even a newfound alliance with Russia. We now know that this hope was unfounded, because Russia did not relent. In hindsight, we can see that the Polish military was correct in its desire to keep fighting. They were a strong force capable of holding a defensible position along the Vistula River. Perhaps they could have prevented what happened next, the second and third partitioning of their homeland. Russia had invaded the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth under the guise of eliminating the Polish constitution and progressive reforms enacted by the Sejm. But after King Frederick II convinced Empress Catherine that Prussia was deserving of compensation for not honoring their alliance with Poland and entering the war against Russia, terms were agreed upon between the two powers to divide Poland up once again. Prussia was eager to seize the wealthy and strategically important city of Gdańsk. In total, they annexed about 22,000 square miles of some of the most valuable land in Poland. Russia annexed a colossal 100,000 square miles of territory. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth lost more than half of its territory and population. What remained was the shell of a former great power. Stanislaw kept his crown, but was effectively a puppet king, held captive in his own country by a garrison of Russian troops. The Targowica Confederation was caught off guard by the second partition. They believed Russia was just going to remove the constitution and maybe the king before giving control of the Commonwealth back to them. Who could have guessed inviting a rival foreign power to invade your own country would backfire? Though to be fair, Russia probably would have invaded the Commonwealth regardless of the Confederation's support. Empress Catherine was extremely angry with Stanislaw after the Constitution was ratified. Anyways, The nobles who formed the Confederation lost most of their support within the same, and Poland as a whole, allowing for the re-emergence of the reformer movement, who still believed the Commonwealth could rise from the ashes of its destruction. Andrzej Kosciuszko, the national hero mentioned earlier, was the strongest supporter of the reformers, and from his self-imposed exile in Leipzig, he organized a rebellion against his Russian-controlled homeland. Kosciuszko had served and studied under George Washington during the Revolutionary War. He knew how to lead a revolution and was confident in the Commonwealth's resolve. But fighting a resistance against a great power who borders you by land is a lot harder than fighting against a tyrant across the sea. He needed time to organize supply chains, command structures, and gather a fighting force. Time was not on his side, unfortunately. Russia's influence in Poland was growing by the day, and their demands increasingly limited the power of the already weakened Commonwealth army. After Russia discovered an insurgent nest in Warsaw, a crackdown on the revolutionary sentiment ensued. Many reformers were arrested, further weakening the cause. Due to the growing amount of pressure, Kosciuszko was forced to begin the uprising sooner than expected. So on March 15, 1794, he began his march on Krakow. 9 days later, on March 24th, Kosciuszko gave a rallying speech in Krakow's town square, formally declaring the revolution with himself as commander-in-chief of the Polish military. He tried to mobilize as many troops as he could, as quickly as he could, but the seemingly sudden nature of it all caught the Polish populace by surprise. They were prepared to fight, but lacked weapons to properly arm their soldiers. Regiments armed entirely of scythes made up a majority of the newly mobilized troops. By this point, Empress Catherine had already ordered the Russian military to attack Krakow, and the Battle of WW2 ensued on April 4th. Despite being outgunned by a better-equipped, professional force, the revolutionary, ragtag army of the Commonwealth prevailed, forcing their enemy into an all-out retreat. News of the Polish victory quickly spread across the country, encouraging more of the populace to rise and join the revolution. The victory at WW2 is mentioned in Poland's national anthem, "Poland is not yet lost." On April 17th, the Russian garrison in Warsaw was forced to flee after the local population rose up in defiance. Thousands of occupying troops were killed before an order to retreat was issued. Similar stories occurred in cities all across the Commonwealth in the coming weeks. It seemed like momentum was in the favor of the resistance. Encouraged by this initial success, Kosciuszko issued the Proclamation of Polani on May 7th, which granted civil liberties inspired by the American and Polish constitutions to all Polish citizens, in theory, ending the feudalistic institution of serfdom. At least that's what would have happened if the revolution was a success. Even though the proclamation never became law, it inspired more of the peasant population to join the cause. It was also the first time in Poland's history that the peasant population was referred as the nation. The initial success of the rebellion was fleeting. The tactical advantages of the Russians became overwhelming once Prussia sent troops of their own across the Polish border. On June 6th, only a month after the excitement of the Polani Proclamation, the Battle of Szykociny was fought between the forces of Poland, led by Kosciuszko, and the combined forces of Russia and Prussia. The numerically superior and better-equipped occupiers defeated Kosciuszko, and only 2 days later, another Polish contingent force was defeated at the Battle of Kelm, after which the resistance fighters retreated back to Warsaw, leaving Krakow to be occupied by the invading armies. On July 13th, Warsaw was besieged by 65,000 soldiers. They unsuccessfully tried to breach the city for 2 months until another uprising from the common people forced them to retreat. At this point, it seemed as if the Polish people would make this war too costly for the invaders to sustain, so the Russian Empress sent her most capable and feared general, Alexander Suvorov, also known as the God of War. General Suvorov won the Battle of Brest and the Battle of Krupczyce in quick succession, before marching on to Warsaw. In an attempt to prevent another siege, Kosciuszko met Suvorov at the Battle of Maciejowice, where Suvorov's forces won out after a brutal, gritty fight. Kosciuszko was wounded in the fighting and subsequently captured and shipped off to St. Petersburg. Legend says that he fell from his horse and shouted, "Finis Poloniae," Latin for "Poland is finished." The Polish resistance fighters lost all sense of stability following the imprisonment of their leader. Several generals attempted to step up and fill the vacancy of commander-in-chief, but none could wear the shoes left by the lost national war hero. On November 4th, the Battle of Praga was fought on the banks of Warsaw in a last-ditch attempt to save the war effort, but General Suvorov was victorious, as he usually was. He allowed his troops to loot and burn Warsaw, indiscriminately massacring over 20,000 people in the process. The uprising officially ended on November 16th, giving way to the third partitioning of Poland, where the remainder of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth would be divvied up between Russia, Prussia, and Austria. The three respective great powers met the following year to discuss the terms of Poland's complete erasure from the maps. After a further 2 years of discussion, terms were met. Austria would annex Western Galicia and Southern Mazovia, along with 1.2 million people living there. Prussia annexed Podlakia, Northern Mazovia, and Warsaw, along with the 1 million inhabitants. Russia annexed everything else, along with the remaining 1.2 million people of Poland. No Polish representative was included in these discussions. The last Polish monarch, King Stanislaw Augustus, was forced to abdicate his throne on the 25th of November, 1795, marking the end of a kingdom that lasted nearly 800 years. Poland ceased to exist as an independent entity for 123 years. For over a century, the land of the people of the fields would be used as a playground for warring great powers to settle their frivolous disputes. The expense of these disputes would be largely paid by the Polish people, who stayed despite their country's erasure. Although many Poles did stay and attempt to build their lives amongst the ruins of their once proud and prosperous kingdom, many more were forced to leave in what is now known as the Great Immigration. Thousands of Polish intellectuals, politicians, artists, and revolutionaries fled to various countries across Europe, most prominently France, which was now under the leadership of a certain mad genius named Napoleon. During the War of the Fourth Coalition against Napoleon, an uprising in the Greater Poland region successfully pushed the occupying Prussian troops out, largely because Napoleon was on Prussia's western doorstep. The Duchy of Warsaw was formed out of this opportunity, established as a semi-independent client state of the French Empire. Following Napoleon's defeat and exile in 1815, the Congress of Vienna dissolved the duchy. 103 years later, after the aging empires of Europe clashed in World War I, Poland was restored as an independent nation. Germany and Austro-Hungary had largely pushed the Imperial Russian forces out of what used to be Poland. On November 5th, 1916, the Kaiser declared the Kingdom of Poland to be reborn. As a puppet state, of course, run by a regency council under German supervision. This kingless kingdom was short-lived. On October 7th, 1918, just about a month before World War I was ended, the Regency Council declared that Poland would once again be independent. Shortly after, a new prime minister was selected, and the Polish army began its rearmament. The new prime minister was short-lived as well, as on November 10th, Joseph Pilsudski returned to his homeland. The following day, on November 11th, he assumed command. By November 14th, he was both commander-in-chief of the Polish armed forces and Poland's chief of state. Pilsudski was chosen to lead Poland into this new age because he was immensely popular amongst the political elite and common people alike. One of the first acts Pilsudski declared, with the support of the newly re-established Sejm, was the inalienable right for women to vote. On November 28, 1918, Pilsudski's decree became official, making Poland one of the first countries in Europe and the world to recognize women's suffrage. From the get-go of Poland's re-emergence as an independent state, border contention was high. Many Polish leaders advocated for the reclamation of territories formerly belonging to the Commonwealth, by force if necessary. At this time, the neighboring people of Belarus, Ukraine, and the Baltic coast were experiencing independent sentiments, but largely failing to see their movements take shape. Pilsudski advocated for the formation of a democratic federation composed of these nations and led by Poland. In theory, this federation would resemble the Commonwealth in size, power, and influence, but it would not be beholden to the same administrative shortcomings and civil unrest caused by the lack of cultural representation in the government. The proposed federation would have been called Intermarium, meaning land between seas, a nation continuing Poland's historical legacy as a multi-ethnic state. The dream of Intermarium proved fruitless. Instead, a series of wars decided the frontiers of Poland. Between the years 1918 and 1921, Poland fought Western Ukraine and the Soviet Union in two separate major conflicts. They also had a skirmish with Lithuania, but no formal war was ever declared. The first conflict began in Ukraine. On October 31st, a group of about 1,500 Ukrainian soldiers took control of Lviv, a historically Ukrainian city, but at the time populated by a Polish majority. On November 1st, the Western Ukrainian People's Republic was declared in Lviv. The Polish military was able to siege the new Ukrainian capital and reclaim control by the end of November, but the war didn't end until the following summer. The Ukrainians were able to regroup and create a strong fighting force, mostly consisting of World War I veterans. They almost managed to retake Lviv a few times, but the war eventually reached a ceasefire after a French-led diplomatic mission convinced the Ukrainian leadership to halt their advance. Negotiations failed, and the fighting resumed, but the ceasefire did allow Poland to regroup and refresh their troops, allowing a successful offensive through Galicia. On July 18, 1919, hostilities officially ended with a Polish victory, and Galicia being internationally recognized as Polish territory. After the Ukrainian War, tensions were high between the Soviets and Polish. A conflict seemed inevitable. Fighting began in early 1919 after the Soviets occupied Vilnius in Lithuania. Pilsudski framed Poland's motive as a fight for Lithuanian liberation. For the first few months, fighting amounted to skirmishes and posturing, until April 16th, when a Polish offensive, led by Pilsudski himself, marched to Vilnius. The Polish premier managed to take the city by April 19th. What started as a somewhat simple mission to liberate Vilnius snowballed into a massive conflict that almost ended with Poland's complete capitulation. After Vilnius, Pilsudski's forces gained further ground and pushed into Russian-controlled territory. At their furthest extent, the Polish offensive occupied and held Minsk, Kiev, the Polotsk region, and largely achieved the goals set out by Pilsudski. That's why he ordered the advance to halt, reasoning that Poland's territorial ambitions had been met. Pilsudski said, probably in arrogance, "I am not worried about the strength of Russia. If I wanted to, I could go now, say to Moscow, and no one would be able to resist my power." You see, the former Russian Empire was in the midst of a civil war. At this point in time, Pilsudski had viewed the imperial White Russians as more of a threat to Poland than the Bolshevik Reds. He was worried to push further into Russia because he didn't want to give the Whites any advantage over the Reds. History might have played out a lot differently if Poland pushed further into Russia. The Soviets might have fallen to the Imperials if they had to fight against Poland as well. I guess we'll never know. What we do know is that the Polish-Soviet War escalated from this point on, lasting another nearly 2 years, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and the wounding of twice as many. The Polish line did not hold forever. Warsaw attempted several times to initiate peace, but those offers were rebuked. The Red Army regrouped their forces and began an offensive aimed at taking Warsaw. I'm intentionally glossing over much of the Soviet advance into Poland. There were many battles and bloody stalemates, especially across the southern front. Offensives and counteroffensives from both sides, and numerous individual actions that altered the entire course of the war. But the culmination of the war was the Battle of Warsaw, which was more of a series of battles than a single fight. The Soviets had pushed the Polish forces all the way back to their capital, and in August of 1920, they were directed to attack in force with all of the might of their numerically superior forces. The Polish military seemed to be on the verge of collapse. The esteemed national hero and commander-in-chief, Pilsudski, had been disgraced following his refusal to press the Polish advantage the summer before, and the failure of the Kiev offensive. The one saving grace of Poland was the fact that they had cracked the Soviet ciphers during their war with Ukraine, a blessing that allowed them to know the precise details of the attack on Warsaw. The Polish forces, led by Pilsudski himself, caught the Soviets off guard by launching a counteroffensive, splitting their advancing forces, and cutting off their means of communication. This decisive action saved Warsaw, and Poland as a whole. The Soviet forces were discombobulated and disorganized. Some divisions pressed forward while others retreated. The lack of cohesion allowed the Polish to completely rout the Red Army, delivering devastating blow after blow. Over 15,000 Soviet troops were killed, with 3 times as many wounded and a staggering 65,000 being taken prisoner. The Battle of Warsaw is one of the most significant victories in Poland's history, and is often remembered as the miracle on the Vistula, though the term miracle undersells the bravery of the Polish military and tactical brilliance of General Pilsudski. The real miracle was the deciphering of the Soviet codes, a feat attributed to Lieutenant Jan Kowalski and his team of brilliant cryptologists. The Polish pushed the diminished Soviet army back far enough for peace talks to resume under favorable conditions for Poland. A ceasefire was agreed upon on October 18, 1920, and the Peace of Riga officially ended the war on March 18, 1921. The eastern Polish border was officially established and would remain unchanged until 1939. The Polish-Soviet War is remembered as a Polish military victory, but also a social, political, and economic defeat. The war left deep scars on the psychological state of the newly refounded nation. Most of the country's young men had been killed, wounded, or traumatized. The same can be said for the Polish civilians as well. Faith in the government was lacking, especially Pilsudski, whose reputation before the war was in great standing, but after which he was either deeply loved and admired or deeply hated and blamed for the nation's great suffering. Now at peace, Poland adopted a new constitution in March of 1921, establishing itself as a republic and limiting the power of the executive branch. Pilsudski resigned as marshal and head of state following the constitution's ratification. Unpleased with his limited role in Poland's new government, he spent his time writing historical books and largely staying out of governmental affairs. During this time, he was lobbied by politicians displeased with the Sejm's ineffectiveness. They wanted him to regain control of Poland through a military coup. He rejected these calls for years, until May 1926, when he forcibly overthrew the democratically elected government and regained his position as head of state and commander-in-chief. Pilsudski held his position as de facto ruler until his death in 1935. He did not live to see the tragedies that would befall his beloved nation during World War II. In the last days of August 1939, the fate of Poland was secretly being decided between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. Publicly, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was a non-aggression agreement between the two historical rivals, but unbeknownst to the world, a hidden deal partitioned the countries of Eastern Europe. Poland was the first target. Its place at the middle ground of the European plain had long been a blessing and a curse, but for the last 200 years, it was far more of a curse. Caught between a hungry eagle, hell-bent on world domination, and a giant bear establishing itself as a world superpower, Poland found itself in another fight for survival. On September 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded from the west, using the staged Gleiwitz incident as a casus belli for war. The horrors that followed are well known and well documented. Poland fought valiantly, especially on the Western Front. The German forces expected to take Warsaw within days, but the Polish military stood their ground, despite the overwhelming blitzkrieg, also known as lightning warfare. The Soviet Union had planned to invade after the fall of Warsaw to improve the optics of their annexation, but Poland's stout defense was taking too long. So on September 17th, the Red Army began its march across Poland's eastern borders. The fighting in the east was a light skirmish compared to the bloodshed in the west. Much of the population in eastern Poland were ethnic Belarusians and Ukrainians who welcomed the Soviets, considerably easing the occupation for Russia. Others resisted fiercely and were either killed or captured and deported. In the end, the Soviets only lost around 1,500 troops, with a further 2,500 wounded. Germany's seizure of Warsaw was anything but easy. German high command had ordered their troops to engage with little regard to human life. The indiscriminate killing of civilians only emboldened the Polish defense. There was also hope and expectation for a combined British and French invasion of Germany's west, which never arrived. The invading forces reached Warsaw on September 9th. That same night, the Battle of Bazura began. By all accounts, Bazura was the bloodiest fight of the invasion. In a desperate attempt to save Poland's capital, or at least preserve it long enough for the Allies to send help, the Poznan army launched a counterattack and succeeded in pushing the German army back about 20 kilometers or 12 miles, recapturing a few towns in the process. The counteroffensive forced the Germans to pull back and regroup their sparsely dispersed troops, giving the people of Warsaw another week or so to evacuate. The battle concluded on the 19th of September, after the Germans used the full extent of their blitzkrieg to push the Polish off the banks of the Bazura River, sending hundreds of aircrafts and heavy artillery units to pummel anything in their path. On September 28th, 1939, the historic Polish capital, Warsaw, officially fell. The Polish government had fled for Romania weeks before. Still, a resistance force made up of the remaining military forces and an organized civilian movement planned to hold their capital until the last person or last building standing. Since the first days of the war, Warsaw had faced the Luftwaffe in an unrestricted aerial bombardment campaign. For the first few days of September, the anti-aircraft units and Polish Air Force were largely successful in defending their city, shooting down 43 Luftwaffe aircraft. As attacks continued to escalate, their ability to keep up diminished. Once German artillery progressed into range, the fate of the city was all but sealed. Black Monday arrived on September 25th. Over 1,200 aircraft, coupled with the destructive power of hundreds of artillery batteries, unleashed hell upon Warsaw, causing civilian deaths by the tens of thousands and immense destruction. After the strategic demolition of the city's waterworks, the cost of human life was too much to bear. Warsaw officially capitulated on September 28th. The rest of Poland was fully occupied by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union by October 6th, marking the end of the Second Polish Republic. The German forces lost roughly 18,000 soldiers, with a further 30,000 wounded. The Polish military suffered approximately 66,000 deaths, with a further 134,000 wounded, and a staggering 675,000 taken prisoner by both Germany and Russia, resulting in the complete dissolution of their nation, which would not see full independence until 1989. The number of civilians killed in the initial invasion are harder to comprehend. Estimates range between 100 to 200,000. And sadly, as you probably already know, many more would be systematically killed before the war was over, in a period we remember and mourn as the Holocaust. For over 1,000 years, Poland had been home to a substantial Jewish community. In 1939, it was home to the largest Jewish population in Europe, numbering about 3,474,000. Poland had historically been known as a tolerant nation, as we have seen and discussed across this video. The Jewish community was synonymous with the Polish community and country as a whole. During the 6 years of occupation, the Nazi Party systematically attempted to exterminate any race, culture, and identity that they deemed as subhuman. This was not only limited to the Jewish. Other targets included the Romani, Slavic, Black, LGBTQ, Freemason, Catholic, and Jehovah's Witness communities. People with disabilities, political opponents, and social outsiders were also targeted. These groups were stripped of all rights and property and were violently relocated to ghettos where they were forced to work in wartime industries under threat of death. Many of the approximately 400 established ghettos rose against their captors, the largest of which was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943, where hundreds of Jewish fighters fought against the final destruction of the roughly 60,000 people inhabiting the ghetto. Over 10,000 people were killed outright through gunfire, building demolition, smoke inhalation, or immolation. Most of the remaining 50,000 people were murdered at extermination camps or in transit to those camps. 6 extermination camps were constructed in total. These death camps were the first industrialized sites in human history dedicated to the destruction of human life. The victims of these camps were taken there by trains and forced into dark chambers before being murdered by poisonous gas. The Nazis employed many other despicable tactics to commit their crimes, including but not limited to death squads, starvation, and excessive forced labor. Most of these victims were killed during the later years of the war as a part of the Nazis' final solution. We are now going to progress to the rest of Poland's history. If you'd like to learn more about the Holocaust, there are many resources that will do far more justice to this period of history than I ever could. I will list some of them in the description below. Throughout the entirety of the German occupation, the people of Poland were fighting back in any way they could. The Polish resistance movement was the largest of any occupied nation in World War II. Their extensive size, uncompromising grit, and disruptive ability earned them the title of Armia Krajowa, the Home Army. The level of cohesion in the face of their occupiers allowed them to coordinate missions like Operation Tempest, which initiated uprisings across the major cities of Poland in order to liberate them before the Soviets arrived. These revolts significantly weakened Nazi control over Poland and allowed the Soviets to invade with greater ease after the non-aggression pact between them was breached. The Home Army didn't just engage in acts of military espionage, as their name might suggest. They performed many of the same duties a government would usually perform, including a judicial system, secret accredited universities, basic social services, and eventually even a parliament. The Polish underground state maintained itself under extremely strenuous conditions and is honored through many memorials across the country today for their bravery and commitment to Poland. By the end of World War II, in September 1945, Poland had suffered the largest percentage loss of civilian life. Of the roughly 35 million Polish citizens in 1939, over 6 million were killed in the 6 years of war. Roughly 3 million of them were Jewish. These are the modern estimates. The extent of loss is still being discovered today. The destruction of life was matched by the destruction of infrastructure. Much like it had been throughout history, Poland had been used as a battleground for some of the largest conflicts on the Eastern Front. With the war behind Poland, there now came the challenge of existing under Stalin's fist. The first of these challenges was the shifting of their borders. In accordance with Stalin's plan outlined at the Tehran Conference and finalized at the Yalta Conference, the western border became defined by the Oder-Neisse line, while their eastern border was pushed to the Curzon line, and the Soviet Union directly annexed everything on the other side of it. The Allies decided the fate of Poland at the Yalta Conference, where it was agreed that a provisional communist government would be established in Poland, essentially condemning Poland to a vassal state status under the Soviet Union. The creation of this new government was a blindside to the Polish government in exile and the underground state still inhabiting Poland. Quite frankly, the Allies turned a blind eye towards the Polish people in order to appease the Soviets. Stalin had assured the Allied leaders that a democratic election would allow the Polish citizens to control their destiny, but the results were set in stone from the start. Poland would be under Stalin's control, whether they wanted it or not. Poland would become one of the most important nations in the Eastern Bloc. Its central position and economic output were vital to the survival of Soviet hegemony in the region, not to mention its symbolic importance as the country where the Warsaw Pact was signed. The Soviets would do everything they could to hold dominion over it, but they faced stalwart resistance from the Poles, who were quite used to making oppressive overlords' lives a living hell. A temporary constitution was established in February of 1947 as a placeholder until the Constitution of the Polish People's Republic was officially proclaimed in 1952. It officially established the Polish People's Republic with the same as its highest authority in the land, though this was hardly the reality. The real power rested in the hands of the Polish United Workers' Party and Joseph Stalin, whose handwritten notations in ink were scribbled across a draft of the Constitution. The Security Service of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, or SB for short, were the hands grasped around Poland's neck during this time. The Secret Service worked with the National Police and paramilitary militias to crack down on any whiff of dissent. They employed operations of mass surveillance using a wide variety of ingenious tactics, ranging from bugging telephones, installing recording devices in public offices, and good old-fashioned spies. The information gathered was critical to suppressing revolts and preventing them before they began. The era of immense pressure and subjugation, beginning in 1947, somewhat lessened in 1956 after Władysław Gomułka retook the reins as leader of Poland. He was briefly first secretary from 1947 to 1948, but was removed from power due to his sentiments towards a version of Poland not in complete subservience to Moscow. His reemergence as first secretary in 1956 heralded the beginning of the end for Stalinism in Poland, in an event remembered as the Polish October, or Gomułka's Thaw. The thaw references a shift in policy towards a more liberal, nationalist, reformer-based government, which resulted in greater autonomy for Poland. The thaw was the culmination of years of growing resentment amongst the Polish people, who disdained the control Moscow held over them. This cycle of Soviet oppression causing civilian unrest, in turn causing Moscow to loosen its hold over Poland, would repeat many times over the years, until 1980, when the independent trade union known as Solidarity would be formed and eventually transform into a political movement powerful enough to shed the shackles holding Poland. The Solidarity movement began as a trade union in the Lenin shipyard of Gdansk. Officially, it was called the Independent Self-Governing Trade Union. In just over a year, its members would encompass 1/3 of the country's working-age population. And in 1983, its leader, Lech Walesa, would be granted the Nobel Peace Prize. The government made many attempts to stifle the union's power, but by 1989, the movement was a cultural phenomenon, with enough momentum to secure a series of roundtable talks with the government. These talks resulted in an agreement to initiate a free election which would allow the Polish people to decide the fate of their country, this time without the interference of Moscow. The 1989 parliamentary elections, held on June 4th and June 18th, resulted in an indisputable victory for the Solidarity movement. Solidarity won every free seat up for election in the Sejm, paving the way for a coalition government headed by Solidarity and backed by the people of Poland. A year later, in 1990, Lech Walesa would be elected president of Poland. The election of Walesa was made possible by the revolutions of 1989, symbolically remembered as the fall of communism. The Polish People's Republic officially ended on December 31st, 1989, paving the way for the Third Polish Republic on January 1st, 1990, known officially as the Republic of Poland, which is the same country we know and love today. In the early 90s, Poland transformed its planned economy into a free market economy, resembling the majority of the Western world. The shock was difficult for the country at first, but by 1995, Poland's GDP had surpassed its pre-market levels. In 1991, Poland became a founding member of the Visegrad Group, a political alliance between the four Eastern European nations of Czechia, Hungary, Slovakia, and of course, Poland. This alliance is meant to foster a cooperative relationship between these closely bonded countries in all aspects: military, economy, culture, and energy. Poland also became a member of NATO in 1999 and joined the European Union as a full member in 2004. Furthering their pattern of unity with the rest of Western Europe, Poland joined the Schengen Area Agreement in 2007, which ensures the free passage across borders with the other member states. The story of modern Poland is still ongoing, and after encompassing thousands of years of Poland's rich history, we've reached the end of our broad view over the entire history of Poland. The land of the people of the fields has been home to some of European history's greatest battles and valiant defeats, birthplace to legendary leaders, and a people whose stalwart resolve has willed their country to persist through unimaginably hard times. Poland is a living representation of perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. It has been my absolute pleasure to share their story with all of you who have watched and listened thus far. Despite the length of this video, we only scratched the surface of Poland's history. If you'd like us to delve deeper into a specific era or event, let us know in the comments below. There are certainly many areas I wish we had time to fit into this video. So thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. Beyond the obvious benefits, it lets me know what kind of content you all would like to see. I've got a laundry list of ideas that I'm excited to share with you, so be on the lookout. This has been Europa Historia. I hope you all have a wonderful day.